Does it raise the stakes? Will you sign off on the discharge petition in the House?
Well, first of all, last week I voted for the rule that directed the Oversight Committee to continue to release these documents. The reason these documents are coming to light is because the Republican majority has moved forward with these subpoenas. Now, the question to me is this about justice or politics? From my vantage point, if there is anyone who committed a criminal offense, anybody who engaged in human trafficking, anybody who engaged in sexual exploitation of women or children, they should be prosecuted, period. And so the question here to me is, are these documents that we're seeking to be released, is it for the purpose of justice for these victims, or is it for the purpose of politics? Some of my colleagues who for 5 years said nothing about this matter at all, seemingly now can talk about nothing else. From my vantage point, if anybody committed a crime, if anybody was involved in furtherance of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes or Ghislaine Maxwell's crimes, they should be prosecuted. That is what the focus should be about with respect to justice for the victims, not politics, which unfortunately is what this seems to be about.
Congressman Lawler, when it comes to the president, though, do you think he needs to be providing clarity, if not for the Republican Party, for the American people?
Look, it's clear the president had a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein years ago. That friendship spectacularly blew up. The president stopped all communication with Jeffrey Epstein. That has been well documented, well reported. The president himself has said as much. I think with respect to this letter, the White House has put out their statement. I'll refer you to them. But the fact is, from my vantage point, again, is this about justice or politics? For some of my colleagues, this seems to be about politics. Because if they were serious about justice for these victims, they would have been demanding this information 5 years ago. They would have been demanding that the Biden DOJ, who had all of this information for 4 years, prosecuted others who engaged in the sexual exploitation and human trafficking of women and children. So if that's what this is about, then we should focus our effort on that. We should be demanding the Justice Department move forward with indictments. But if it's about politics, which unfortunately is what it seems to be about for most of the press and many of my colleagues in Washington, I don't see how that serves the American people.
Well, I think some of the concern, Congressman, and I appreciate the point that you're making, is that, A, the president ran on this in part. It's been a huge issue for MAGA to get these files
right. And
released.
You've already had over 30,000 documents released in the last week.
The fact that the president keeps calling this a hoax, and those victims who were up on Capitol Hill with you and your colleagues last weekend are not a hoax. They're real people. Isn't that damaging language to call this a hoax?
Yeah, respectfully, he's not calling the victims a hoax. He has said they are victims. And by the way, respectfully, sir, who prosecuted Jeffrey Epstein? Who prosecuted Ghislaine Maxwell? It was the Trump administration in Trump 1 that prosecuted them. So to somehow imply that anybody is saying that there weren't victims, there were. The question is, again, is this about justice or is this about politics? You're spending an awful lot of time on this. You're spending an awful lot of time on this without actually having any credible evidence of a crime.
They're offended by this,
so let me ask you a question.
So
let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. What crime are you alleging?
You don't have to ask me the questions. I want to know if you're going to sign the petition, Congressman.
What crime are you alleging has been committed? What crime?
I'm not alleging anything. I'm asking you if you will sign the discharge petition that your colleagues wrote in a series of Republicans. Why are you yelling over me, Congressman? Why can't you just answer the questions?
The information is being, well, respectfully, the information is being released. You had over 30,000 documents that have been released in the last week. Have you taken the time to go through all 30,000 of them? Since you're very concerned about the information that is in it?
Based on the reviews. Yeah. Well, look, you can try to accuse us or imply what you want here, Congressman, but
let me ask you a question.
So you're going to interview me now about the Epstein documents. I'm assuming that you're not going to sign the discharge petition is what you're saying, right?
How could my colleagues
Are you going to sign the discharge petition, Congressman Lawler?
how could my colleagues make a statement
yes.
that 97% have already been released within the span of those documents being released, when half these people can't even read a 1,000-page CR? But they took the time to go through 33,000 pages.
I'm asking you.
Well, you're
I don't know, Congressman. You'd have to ask your colleagues.
The statement. You're asserting the statement that the Democrats put out. You just reasserted it on national television. Have you taken the time to go through the 33,000 documents or no? The answer is no.
I'll assume that you're not going to sign the discharge petition,
you and I
Congressman.
both know that. So
if you want to arrange an interview with one of us, we'll do that anytime that you'd like, sir. But I appreciate your answering our questions.
The documents are being released, okay? You've had over 33,000 documents released, including yesterday, from the estate, from the Epstein estate. That is a result of Congress's work. So to sit here and say that we're not releasing the documents, we are. They are actually being gone through. You know why?
No one said that, Congressman. I asked you only if you were going to sign the discharge petition. So you can't answer that question.
The discharge petition is entirely political. The documents are being released as we speak. You're literally talking about documents that were released yesterday, were you not? So how do you think those documents came to be? It's not because of the discharge petition. It's because of the work being done by the Oversight Committee. So maybe if you're serious about justice for the victims, if you're serious about making sure that anybody who committed a crime is prosecuted, then you should focus on the actual substance of it and not sit here and play political games.
So you're not going to sign the discharge petition, I guess. Could you tell us if the government's going to shut down at the end of this month? Is it something you're worried about?
I'm glad you're actually focused on something like that, which really impacts everyday Americans. So the fact is that, as I've said over and over and over, a government shutdown is unacceptable, okay? And when I was in Congress last year with a Democratic president, I voted to keep the government funded and open. My Democratic colleagues, starting with Chuck Schumer, need to keep the government open. This isn't a time for games. It's not a time for trying to negotiate for some big deal. The government needs to stay open. It requires passing a short-term CR, and they should support that. Every single Democrat should be on record in support. Just last Congress, every single Democrat supported clean CRs. So I don't know what would have changed except the president.
Congressman Lawler, where are you when it comes to rescissions packages for money that's already been distributed? Is that something you can sell in your district?
Well, what happens with the rescission package is that the administration brings it forward and Congress will evaluate it. So we did that on one with respect to some of the USAID projects, and we voted in favor of rescinding those expenditures. That is the lawful process. So that is what we followed. If the administration comes forward with another package, we'll evaluate it.
Curious about, Congressman, the idea of extending Obamacare subsidies that are set to expire at the end of this year. This has become, at least over the past couple of days, from what we're hearing, the potential path to a deal with Democrats, that this might, in fact, bring everybody to the table. Is it something that you would sign on to if it meant funding the government beyond this month?
Well, I've already co-authored legislation to extend the premium tax credit by a year. This was something that was put in place during COVID to help families, obviously at a critical moment when it came to health care. This is not something that should stay in effect long term, but it is something that we need to smartly transition out. And so we want to extend it by a year to give a process by which this can be appropriately phased out over time. But certainly as part of any agreement, it needs to be done by the end of the year. And that is something that I support and why I introduced legislation along with my colleague Jen Kiggins and many others to do that.
Congressman Lawler, I'd like to talk about the foreign policy developments of the day. There has been an Israeli attack on Doha, one that the president has posted to Truth Social suggesting that Israel had warned the United States that that was going to happen. In the fallout of this event, are you concerned at all about the relationship between the United States and Israel, but also the United States and Qatar?
Look, the leadership of Hamas has been living in Qatar for years. They have been given every opportunity throughout this conflict to agree to the terms of a ceasefire, to release all of the hostages. And we are approaching the second anniversary of October 7th, and that has not happened. So for everybody who wants this conflict to come to an end, for everybody who demands Israel agree to the terms of a ceasefire, Israel has agreed to those terms. Hamas has not. Hamas continues to hold hostages to this day with no end in sight. And my question to the French, to the Brits, to others who are racing to recognize a Palestinian state is who, what, and where. Who are you recognizing? What government are you recognizing, and what are the boundaries by which you are recognizing? There is an international process to recognize a government state. They're not following that, shockingly. But when you look at the situation in Gaza, my question to them is, okay, Israel stops the war today. Who's removing Hamas from power? Because everybody says that Hamas cannot remain in power. And yet I'd love for somebody to explain exactly how they're going to remove them if this conflict immediately ends without a ceasefire agreement and without the hostages being released. So the actions Israel took today, I support. Hamas's leadership was given more than enough time to end this conflict. They have chosen not to.
Congressman Lawler, even the White House, though, has come out and said that this attack does not serve or advance the goals that even you have just laid out. Donald Trump has said that himself when it comes to his post on Truth Social. This is a repeating pattern that we are now seeing where Israel has gone forward to pursue attacks in the region without first consulting the White House. Is Israel driving the foreign policy agenda of the United States when it comes to the Middle East?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to get into the specifics. As chair of the Middle East and North Africa Subcommittee, certainly more acutely aware of some of these issues. But the bottom line to me, the administration obviously is within their right to have their position on this. And obviously, with respect to Qatar, they have been an ally in many respects. In other respects, there's been challenges. And I think anybody who has engaged in Middle East politics certainly understands that. Israel is not driving U.S. foreign policy, not in the least. President Trump obviously has been fully in control of the decisions made by the U.S. military and our State Department and taken action where necessary, including striking at Iran's nuclear facilities just a few short months ago. So Israel, of course, is their own country, and they're going to make decisions based on their own security. And the fact is that Hamas and Iran and their other terror proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, continue to be a threat. You saw just yesterday the death of 6 Israelis in Jerusalem. And so this is a continued challenge that they deal with. Think about as we approach the 24th anniversary of 9/11. If we were under constant threat, if we were under constant attack, if missiles were constantly being launched into the United States borders, if suicide bombers were constantly taking action to kill innocent Americans, do we really think we wouldn't be responding? Do we really think that we wouldn't be taking necessary steps to eliminate the threat? I think not.